Inside Dittofi, you can bind variables to any element on the screen. In this tutorial, we are going to learn how you can bind a single variable to multiple elements. To demonstrate this, we are going to bind a text variable to both an input box and a text element at the same time. This will allow us to take user inputs into a text box, such as this one here, and then display this input elsewhere on the front end of our app like so. The process of binding a variable to both an input element and an output element is known as two-way variable binding. So to begin with, I'm going to create a variable and call it app user name. I'm going to set the type to text and leave the initial value blank. Next, I'm going to search for a text input element and drag and drop this onto my apps page. Using the element settings, I can then update the input text for this input box to say, try typing in your name. This adds text to my input box to explain to my users what I want them to do. After this, I'm going to search for the heading element and drop this into the first column between the heading element and the paragraph element like so. I can then use the styles panel to update the color of this second heading element to a Dittofi purple. After I've done this, I'm going to select the input box, expand the element settings by clicking on the cog icon here. I am then going to click on the T to bring up the element binding options and choose to bind the input box element to the app username variable like so. Now, whenever a user types into this input box, the text will be automatically put into my app username variable. After this, I'm going to select the heading element, expand the element settings by clicking on the cog icon, click on the T to bring up the element binding options and choose to bind the heading element to the app username variable as well. At this point, the app username variable that I've created is bound to both this input box and this heading element. So let's see what happens when I rebuild my code and refresh my live app. Okay, so now that the code has built, I can go over to my live app and refresh the page. Now, I can type into this input box, and as you can see, the text that I type into this input box updates the value of my app username variable, which is also bound to this heading element here. So whenever I type into this input box, because the input box is bound to my new app user variable, this will push all of that new data that I'm typing into this input box into my new app user variable. This data will then be displayed inside the heading element here, because the heading element is also bound to my app username variable. In the next lesson, we will look at front-end actions and see how we can use these to start making our application interactive.